Hello, everyone. I am here with Adam, who is one of our AI automation engineers. And we wanted to share with you a little bit of the workflows and automation we're doing. So we use N8N, and we use that as really the central focal point, and we integrate to different platforms or other third parties. But the first one we want to talk about is something we're doing for Finsure, helping us to be much more efficient in creating websites for their network of brokers. So what you're seeing on the screen here is what we've set up as the master template. So when we run an N8N workflow, it takes this template and base as the starting point. So how it works is we first give Finsure this form to fill out. Fundamentally, what it does is take the administrator through a series of questions. So you would use this form in the event someone wanted to create a new Finsure website. And the first thing they do is select the template or the look and feel that they want. So there's two options currently. We call it a corporate and a premium option. And then they proceed to fill out things like their name, the company name, a broker's name, the title, the biography, phone number, and a whole bunch of different things. There's a couple of pages which lets them select the calculators they want integrated, along with different information like the videos they want, the services they want, and all of that stuff. We have all these different flexible use cases for the way that data is input. So you can see here in our master template, we've got a service called Other, which is showing lorem ipsum. And why we've set it up this way is because in our form, we actually allow the broker to nominate a different service apart from the typical standard services that brokers might have. So obviously, you've got your first home buyers, refinance, investing, the usual stuff. But we know that brokers sometimes have a custom service they provide for their clients. So things like this is some of the really exciting stuff that we can automate for Finsure and their network of brokers. We've also integrated our workflows with Discord. So Adam will show you that in a second. And we can not only automate the triggering of a workflow, so when someone fills out a form or when someone sends an email, we can also manually trigger that from different means. And we personally use Discord in the company, but there's heaps of different things that we can do. But effectively, to take a step back, and then I might just cue you, Adam, to show some of the behind the scenes. So what happens is a broker fills out this form. We get notifications saying that a form has been completed, and that also goes and triggers the workflow to commence. And so it gets working, it creates or clones this website, and then it gets working on customizing it to the input of the form. I think, Adam, I might let you share your screen because we're going to go through it, but a bit more of a manual context. Adam's going to trigger the workflow from Discord, and we're going to just run through what that looks like in N8N.
Yeah, so I've got Discord open here. So what I'll do is I'll call our N8N agent bot, which I've integrated with Discord to trigger the workflow. We're just going to put the tag for Finsure, and then we're going to put the URL of the site that we're going to clone, and then that will trigger the workflow. What that does is essentially it'll trigger the workflow in N8N from the Discord chat or from the form submission. A couple of basic steps at the beginning, just setting the URL, getting website info, and then moving into form data. So that is just getting the user input from the form. So the next step is just validating that data. So what that does is it'll just go through, format things like the phone numbers, make sure that all the locations are correct, or spelling, things like that. Uses AI, mainly Perplexity and OpenAI API, just to format all of the data correctly for the workflow.
I think this is super cool because, one of the things that we know from taking user inputs is that that classic adage, the user is always right. So sometimes what we get is inputs that are, wrongly formatted, or, when someone says what location they're operating in, they might have a typo or something. And so what we need to be is smart enough to be able to recognize which suburb they're referring to, which city they're referring to, which state. So we came across an issue, not an issue, but a use case, this morning, I think, Adam, when we talked about Surrey Hills in Sydney versus Surrey Hills in, I think, Victoria. And we were really happy because through AI, we were able to ascertain that through the other context of the other locations the user provided, that they were referring to Surrey Hills with an E in Victoria.
Yeah, exactly. So despite the spelling being like the Surrey Hills in Sydney, the AI was able to pick up that it was actually referring to the Surrey Hills in Victoria. So like Tash said, based on the other locations, the other two suburbs being in Victoria, it concluded that the Surrey Hills was meant to be the one in Victoria as well.
Can you go into a bit why do we use Perplexity versus OpenAI? Like, what's the difference in the use cases, Adam?
Yeah, for sure. So essentially, the Perplexity API is better suited, I should say, for things like searches, getting more accurate or reliable data. So things like the median house prices of the locations, it's a lot more up to date and also reliable. So a lot better for our sites. That way we don't have to go through, manually check and validate ourselves. And then the OpenAI is more for the rewriting of the content, which is very good. It works well, and it does it quickly. So yeah.
Can I just take over sharing for a second? Because I just show everyone a location page. Now, this is really interesting because we know that Google is prioritizing local SEO for certain businesses. So think like cafes, hospitality, physios, even brokers, accountants, that kind of thing, right? And so what we were able to do is create a website template that has these opportunities to show locality in the page content. So this is one of our pages which we're set up. And what Adam was referring to in terms of the variables or the data associated with like search data is that what happens when this workflow is completed is that all of this is actually populated with the location. So we were talking about Surrey Hills just then, right? And we can pull information on house prices, unit prices, median prices, and historical prices. And it just goes to creating a really detailed page that is relevant to organic ranking. So what you'll get at the end of it, where you have a page targeted to the service, so mortgage broking in this context, along with the locality. So like mortgage broker in Surrey Hills, and you get a really good, strong page that can help with your local SEO. I will let you take over again. Thanks, Adam.
Okay, so after that, we get the site data. So fetch all site data, that's just making a GET request to pull all of the current page data from the site in JSON form. It essentially just gets all of that data so that we know what to rewrite, what to replace, things like that. For the next node for process content replacement, that's just going through all of the placeholders, things like the location, company name, phone number, all of that data is going to be changed from the beginning. It just makes it a bit easier for the AI to not have to worry about placeholders, things like that. And then we're going to batch post the coded changes from the beginning. That way, for the upcoming nodes, the AI, when it gets that new data, it just has to rewrite it straight away rather than having to worry about placeholders, things like that. Moving on to images, we do have a sub workflow for the images just because we found that it is a workflow that is run on different levels, not just for this one. So what I do is we just prepare the image data. It just gets all of the images that need to be replaced on the current site. And then it essentially just prepares how many images, what pages they're going to be used for. And then that's fed into our sub workflow that finds it from our pretty vast library of images based on keywords like the service name or the page name. It'll find an image that hasn't been used and then essentially download it and store that data for the site when it gets pushed out.
So this sub workflow, I think, has saved our design team a significant amount of time, because what we were able to do is categorize the images based on the service. So in a mortgage broking context, it would be like, okay, this is an image of a first home buyer. This is an image of a personal loan. This is an image of a construction loan. And what that sub workflow then goes and does is it's smart enough to make sure that when it replaces the image or associates a new image with the new website we're creating, it aligns the service or the category with the appropriate image.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so moving on to the content generation. This part might run a little bit quick, but essentially what I've done is I've broken up the content generation into various nodes. This way, when it runs through the AI knows that the content that it's generating is for a specific type of page. So the first one is just the general content, things like the home page, the about page, all of those general pages, essentially making the calls to OpenAI to rewrite the content, and then it formats it back into the JSON that it needs to be in to push out at the end. Then we've got the profile content. So that's the individual personalized data, the team members' profiles. And then we've got the services content. So all of the services that Tash showed at the beginning, plus the other, if that's going to be used. And then we've got the meta descriptions that rewrites the meta titles and the meta descriptions, making sure that it's SEO optimized, using things from the input data, such as the locations, services, company name. All of those are used to rewrite that title and description.
I think what's phenomenal about, sorry to interrupt, Adam, but what I was going to say is what's phenomenal about what we're doing and the way you segmented the types of content is that I think sometimes we can take for granted when we see a website the different kinds of content you need to create. The most obvious one is obviously the words on the page that we're seeing. But what we're trying to show here is that you actually have to treat content in different ways. And the most obvious one being like those meta titles and meta descriptions. We want to make sure that they are written in such a way to support that organic ranking and that SEO important way. But then you've got also the services content, the context, we talk about that. And then I think even like the about content, Adam, maybe that might be worth going into a little bit with like how we take the user's input, but we refactor that to be suitable for like a profile or an about page.
Yeah, 100%. So with what Tash was just referring to, essentially we get the user input, so what the broker writes about themselves, and then we will essentially categorize it into either general company information or the individualized broker information. And how we do that is it runs through the AI to read it, and then each of those two segments will get handled separately so that the company information is used for the about page and throughout the website. But then the broker information, the individualized data and information, is then used to write that content for the broker. So just the last steps, just for the location pages, that's where we use that Perplexity data for the median house prices, as well as the other information like the demographics, making sure that all the data is up to date, reliable, accurate, and then feeding whatever we got from Perplexity into OpenAI to rewrite all of the content on that page. And that runs for up to 4 location pages based on the user input. And then we just build the post payloads, just making sure that it's in the correct JSON format, making sure that all the IDs are correct, all the names are correct. And then we batch post all of the updates. And then deleting the application password, and we've got the Discord updates, which will look like that.
Awesome. Do you mind if I hijack again, Adam, just to show people? Because what we actually did before we made this workflow is we effectively wrote down every single step that is required of like a content manager or a designer. And I think what this demonstrates is just the productivity and efficiency you can bring with a workflow like this. We talked about content, and I think one of the most important things there is that, content is actually contextual, right? And so like how you're inserting content on a page or in the back end or in the CMS is so diverse and so different. So it's not just linear, like replace this, replace this, replace this. And I think this is one of the real strengths in some of the stuff we're doing now, because, you've got consumer tools like Wix and Squarespace, and obviously they're doing phenomenal things in their own way. But I still think there's a gap or a space for needing an enterprise solution or something that has the functionality more suited to what a business needs. So our use case here is that we are actually creating an entire workflow that is optimized to what the mortgage broking industry wants. And I don't think that's something that other platforms will be doing outside the box, which gives us a really great space to do something like this. So in the future, we're going to explore, well, what do accountants want? What do financial advisors want? And what do all these other verticals want, which I think is super, super important. That also takes me to segue to maybe a little bit more focus on these location pages, because you may or may not be aware, but we actually created a case study on what we did with ATEC Electrics, which was an electrician based in the Northern Beaches. And what we cover in the case study is effectively how we help them rank for organic search so that they got a lot of qualified leads and they got a recurring system of lead generation through the work we were doing on the website. A big part of that, or a big proponent of that, was these location pages. So now what we're doing, and what Adam's workflow showed, is that we can actually create these location pages straight away when we create someone's website. And that was saving like 4 or 5 days of work. I think when we did this work for ATEC, we created about 20 pages, one for each suburb based in their proximity or locality in the area they were servicing. And what we're doing now is we're saying, okay, we've got a phenomenal template or framework that we know results in leads, that we know can help a small business. How can we make it efficient so that we can deliver the same piece of work for a more cost-effective price for across a wide variety of different clients? And I'll make sure to link this blog in the notes just in case you didn't come across it. But if I just quickly show you a bunch of the different websites we've already completed, you can see each one has a group of location pages at the bottom here. Yeah, and I might show you another site really quickly so you can see this is another site, and we had a couple different location pages there. So yeah, really exciting workflow, and one I hope to share with you more as we take to the next steps with all these different clients. I think we've just also finished doing location pages on a custom blinds company based in Melbourne. I just loaded it here so you can see. I believe we ran a workflow on this, right, Adam, to create these pages?
Yeah, it was a separate workflow, but essentially following the same principle of pulling that data and then rewriting all the information for each of the locations.
Yeah, so this website launched, I think, only 2 weeks ago. So we're optimistically tracking to see how it progresses in the suburb level. And I think that if it proves to be very successful, we've got a really, really strong workflow that we can run in I don't know, minutes. How long has this call been, Adam? 20 minutes or whatever it is?
Yeah, I think it ran in about 10 minutes.
Yeah, and we were able to output content of this magnitude that hopefully can help these small businesses in such a strong, robust way. So yeah, stay tuned. We'll keep everyone updated, obviously, and excited to progress as we go along.